Your hand doesn't shake when you sign. That's the first thing they notice. Not your name, not your age, the steadiness. It's a Wednesday in October, a recruiting office in a town where the tallest building is a grain elevator, and the biggest news cycle of the last decade was when it caught fire. You're 18. You'll be 19 before you ship. The pen moves across the paper like you've been rehearsing this moment without knowing it. You didn't come here because the town had nothing left for you. You came because something in you refused to wait for a life to arrive. Basic combat training is 11 weeks. It doesn't break people the way films suggest. No dramatic collapse, no single moment of reckoning. It removes them, quietly, methodically, like water finding the weakness in stone. A man in your platoon, exceptional by every civilian measure, gone on day 47. No argument, no scene. His bunk empty before morning formation. You never learned why. You stopped wondering after week 2 because wondering costs energy, and energy is the only currency that matters here. Week 9, 4:30 a.m., Georgia in November. The ground hasn't decided yet between mud and frost. You're running with 40 pounds on your back before the sky is committed to being light. Your left thumbnail has been taped since week 6 when it separated from the nail bed on a low crawl, and you didn't report it because reporting means stopping, and stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means something you don't have a word for yet, but you already know you refuse to become. One morning, your entire platoon finishes a ruck together without a single man dropping. No one cheers. The drill sergeant doesn't acknowledge it. He just moves to the next evolution. That silence is the first real praise you've ever received. You understand something in it that you couldn't have explained 3 months ago. You're not Delta Force. You're not a Ranger yet. You're barely a soldier, but you're still here. And you will not understand until level 6 exactly how rare that is. No briefing, no overview, no map of what's coming. They hand you a grid coordinate and walk away. You're 21. You've spent 6 months preparing for this, running with weight before dawn, studying land navigation until the contour lines felt like a language you were born speaking. You arrived at the selection site in West Virginia believing preparation was a form of armor. It isn't. Preparation is just the entry fee. The mountains don't negotiate. No clocks, no rankings, no indication you exist at all. You finish one checkpoint and receive the next coordinate. That's all. That's everything. Delta selection is not measuring speed or strength. It's measuring what your mind does when everything external stops working. Day 6. A candidate named Fitch, smaller than you by 20 pounds, has been finishing every checkpoint 40 minutes ahead of you. You've never spoken. On day 6, he's gone. No explanation, no announcement. His absence is simply a fact the mountains absorb without comment. Then there's the long walk. No distance given, no time limit stated. You walk with weight through mountains until they tell you to stop. Most men quit this event, not because their bodies fail. They quit because they start calculating. The moment the math begins, how far, how long, how much left, something structural weakens. The body can manage pain. It cannot manage the open equation. You stop calculating around hour 14. You stop expecting an end. You just walk. 3 weeks later, a letter arrives. 19 candidates entered your cohort. 4 are invited to continue. You read your name. Then you read it again. You don't feel triumph. You feel the specific weight of something you are not yet strong enough to carry, but have been handed anyway. You fold the letter once. Tell no one. Week 1 of OTC. An instructor sets a pistol on the table in front of you. He doesn't speak for a long moment. Then, everything you know about this is a habit. Habits are not skills. We're going to take the habit apart. What's left underneath is where we start. You fired tens of thousands of rounds. You qualified expert 3 cycles running. You say none of this. You pick up the pistol and begin again from 0. The operator training course runs 6 months at a facility that does not appear on any public map. Not mislabeled, not redacted, simply absent. The people who need to know where it is already do. Everyone else doesn't need to. Marksmanship is first, but not range marksmanship. You learn to shoot while moving, in 3% of normal light, in a room containing 11 people where only 1 is a threat, and you have under a second to determine which. The first time you make the wrong call, no one raises their voice. The instructor marks something on a clipboard and resets the room. The silence is more precise than any correction. Your hands change over 6 months. Not calloused, reorganized. The bones and muscle find a new logic, one your conscious mind doesn't need to supervise anymore. You stop thinking about the shot, you start thinking past it. Then demolitions, breaching, close quarters battle, language study, Pashto, assigned based on deployment history, medical training that extends well beyond any standard. You learn to manage a sucking chest wound in total darkness with one hand while your team is still in contact with the target. You learn to think like a surgeon while your hands are shaking and 30 seconds have already passed since you needed to start. Near the end of week 9, an instructor named Master Sergeant Okafor addresses your group before a night exercise. His voice carries the specific flatness of a man who has stopped performing authority because he no longer needs to. The question is never whether you're brave enough. Brave enough is the floor, not the ceiling. He stops there. You wait for the rest. He moves on. You will wait 11 years for the second half of that sentence. You graduate on a cold December morning. No ceremony. A handshake, a coin, an assignment. You're 22. You feel like you've absorbed a decade. You are not invincible. You are ready. You now understand those are not the same condition and never were. You come home from the first deployment and someone asks what you did over there. You smile. You say, training. It isn't a lie. It isn't the truth. And the distance between those two things begins quietly to widen. You're 24. Delta operates in what the military designates a Tier 1 environment. The missions no other unit attempts. The windows that open for 6 hours and close forever. Your squadron runs 4 to 8 man assault teams where specialization is a liability. Because when you go through a door at 0200 in northern Iraq, there is no specialist behind you. Everyone is the specialist. Every man carries the whole capability. Salah ad-Din, 2011. You sit in the vehicle 40 minutes before breach with nothing left to do but be present. The silence has a texture now. You know it well. The assault runs 3 minutes. Clean. 2 associates detained, target secured, no casualties. In the debrief, you say 38 words. Your team leader says fewer. The mission doesn't make the news. Nothing you do makes the news. This is the thing civilians misread about units like this. The absence of coverage is not an oversight. It is the product. The missions that matter most are the ones that prevent the event rather than respond to it. Prevention doesn't generate footage. Silence doesn't trend. But somewhere in the subtraction of a single facilitator from a single supply line, something that would have happened doesn't. You will never know exactly what. That is also part of the job. Specialist Reyes dies on the second Iraq deployment. Not in contact, a vehicle accident on the return from Alinka, ordinary physics. Random and total. The morning before, in the vehicle, he said something unremarkable about the heat. A small complaint. The kind of thing a man says when he expects tomorrow to exist. You attend the funeral in dress uniform. You don't speak. There is nothing adequate. So you stand straight and say nothing and carry it forward, because that is the only place left to put it. The operators who last in this world are not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who feel it completely and move anyway. You are still moving. The first time you brief a mission as team leader, your voice doesn't shake. Your hand pressed flat against your thigh under the table leaves a mark. You're 27. 6 men follow you through the door now. Not abstractly, not on paper. Specifically, completely, with their lives as the unit of measurement. The transition from operator to leader is not a promotion. It is a restructuring of what you are responsible for and what that responsibility costs. Your job is no longer to execute. It's to think while executing. Kowalski favors his left under pressure. Rivera needs 4 more hours of sleep. Both facts live in the plan before either man knows it. Leading Tier 1 operators is not like any other leadership. These men are not waiting for direction. They are complete professionals who will follow you for exactly one reason. You have earned it. The day you coast on past performance, they know. The day you make a call that protects your record instead of the mission, something between you fractures. No debrief repairs it. No after-action review names it. It simply exists from that moment forward as a weight in the room. Kurdistan 2015. 2 American aid workers. 11 days in a compound. Intelligence says they move at dawn. You have 4 hours. You make the plan. You brief every contingency. At 0217, you breach the outer wall. At 0219, you're inside. At 0221, both hostages are secured and moving. At 0224, your team is on the exfil vehicle. One assaulter takes a fragment to the forearm, non-critical, treated on the bird. The commanding officer calls it textbook. It wasn't. Room 2 went wrong in the first 8 seconds. You improvised 3 decisions in 40 seconds, and the training held where the plan didn't. The third decision, the one that worked, only existed because the first decision failed. If the plan had held, you would have taken a different line and the outcome would have been worse. You don't include that in the debrief. Not because you're hiding it, because the only person who needs to understand it is you. You stay in the room room after everyone leaves. You don't sit. Sitting means finished. You stand in the center of the empty space and go through it again. Every hinge point, every variable, everything you'll change. This is the habit, not surviving the mission, extracting from it. You no longer go through the door. You decide who does. On paper, that distinction is a promotion. In practice, it is the loneliest structural change you have ever experienced, because now every door your men walk through carries the specific weight of a decision you made, a training cycle you prioritized, a capability gap you either closed or didn't, 8 months before anyone knew this mission would exist. You're 33, Troop Sergeant Major, 30 men, not a number, 30 faces you see before their names when you look at the roster each morning. There's an operator named Whitfield, 12 years in the unit, decorated multiple times. The kind of man younger operators study without realizing they're studying him. But in the last 3 rotations, something has shifted in his decisions. Not wrong, narrower. He is managing risk now instead of owning it. You watched it happen across 3 rotations. A man choosing the safe option when the situation required the right one. Nobody got hurt. Yet one evening you sit with him. The coffee has been in the pot since morning. You don't freshen it. You don't open with context or framing. You're good, Whitfield. You've been good a long time, but I need you making decisions like the version of you that existed before you had something to protect. That version took risks because the mission required it. This version is protecting his record. The man beside you needs the first version, not the second. He looks at his coffee for a long time. The silence is not resistance. It is a man locating something he had set down without noticing. Then he nods. He becomes one of your best operators for the next 4 years. Not because you fixed him, because he was already capable of it and you were honest enough to ask before the window closed. That is the work at this level. Not tactics, not planning, people. You can build tactics into anyone with enough repetition. You cannot manufacture a man willing to be dismantled and rebuilt at 33, but you can recognize the ones who are capable of it, and you can be honest enough, early enough, to ask. What you'll never know is whether Whitfield was ready because of what you said, or whether he was already ready and simply needed someone to say it out loud. That uncertainty is yours to carry, permanently. The Operations Center. The exfil birds are inbound on the board. You are not outside waiting. You are standing in front of a screen, watching a blinking indicator move across a grid. And for the first time in 15 years, you are not allowed to be in the room where it matters most. You're 38. Lieutenant Colonel, Squadron Commander, and this is the specific tax of this level. You shaped everything that happens tonight, and you are permitted to witness none of it directly. Syria, 2019. The operation reconceives itself 4 times in 2 weeks. Each time, your men rebrief without complaint and reset completely. Your men rebrief without complaint. They reset. They execute to the same standard on the 4th version as they would have on the 1st. That is not a given. That is the direct result of a training culture you spent 2 years building before this deployment existed as a concept. 8 months ago, you sat in a budget meeting and chose to prioritize one capability over another. A dry decision. Spreadsheet language. No drama. Tonight, that choice is the reason the exfil runs clean. You sit with that in the silence of the operations center and feel something move through your chest. Not pride, gratitude. The specific gratitude of a man who made a decision alone in a room with incomplete information, and the decision held when it mattered. You pick up the phone to call home. You let it ring once and hang up before anyone answers. It's 0340. Too late or too early? You aren't certain which. You aren't certain what you would say if someone picked up and asked how you are. The hardest part of command at this level is not the missions. It is the funerals. You have stood at grave sites in dress uniform for men you selected, trained, and sent. You stood straight, back flat, eyes forward, and afterward, when the family had gone and the other officers had gone and the ceremony had fully ended, you stayed. Not for protocol, because you needed to say something you had no words for, and the only place left to say it was there. You take the authority. You take the outcome. You take what the mission costs. The ones who last at this level do not make peace with that weight. They carry it, and they come back to work the next morning and make the next decision as cleanly as they can. Because the alternative is to let the weight change the decision. And that is the one failure that cannot be walked back. There's a question nobody asks you when you take command. Are you prepared to be responsible for a decision that was correct and still cost someone? Nobody asks because the answer has to be yes. And everyone in the room already knows that yes is the heaviest single syllable in the English language when you mean it completely. You're 44. Full Colonel, Commanding Officer of 1st SFODD. There is one of you. Your photograph does not appear in press releases. Your name is not attached to the operations your unit runs. Your itinerary exists in a distribution list of fewer people than you can count on both hands. You have been in uniform for 25 years. You know this unit the way a surgeon knows the difference between a hand that is working and a hand that is compensating. Your authority is total. Your visibility is near zero. That is not an accident. That is the design working correctly. The phone rings at 0300. A voice from the Pentagon. A mission not yet authorized in a country you are not officially present in, addressing a threat that has not been publicly acknowledged. You have 4 hours to assess feasibility and provide a professional recommendation that will inform national policy before sunrise. This is not a scenario. This is Tuesday. You work through it, not dramatically, structurally. The way a man works through a problem when the cost of the wrong answer is measured in people rather than resources. You give the assessment, it is accepted, you go back to the other work. One night, a junior analyst new to the building asks you what the job is actually like. Not the official version, the real one. You think for a moment, not performing the pause, actually thinking. Every decision I make lands on someone younger and braver than I am. I get the authority, they get the ground. That asymmetry should make you slightly uncomfortable every single day. The morning it stops making you uncomfortable is the morning you've become the wrong person for this job. He writes it down. You notice he writes the whole thing, not just the last line. You hope he keeps the notebook. What you don't say? Delta Force is a culture. It survives only by choice, every generation's choice. You are responsible for passing that culture forward intact. That responsibility is heavier than the rank. Heavier than any single mission. Because a mission ends. Culture either survives or it doesn't, and the damage is invisible until it is total. Once at an airport, a young soldier looked directly at you and didn't recognize you. Looked straight through you. Moved on. You felt something. Not injury, not even irony, just yes, exactly. This is how it should work. 30 years of training taught you to decide faster, cleaner, with less margin for error each time. At this level, you learn the opposite. You learn to slow down precisely enough to identify what cannot be undone. You're 50, Lieutenant General, JSOC Commander. Joint Special Operations Command encompasses Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, and several units whose names do not appear in any public document. You are the principal military authority over the entire architecture. The machinery runs on 4 continents simultaneously. It does not pause for weather, politics, or the fact that you slept 3 hours last night and the board changed twice before you reached your desk this morning. You do not complain about this. Complaint is a form of surprise. A JSOC commander who is surprised by the complexity of the world has not been paying attention. The political dimension is something no training course prepares you for. These relationships are not transactions. They are infrastructure. Damage one, and you spend years rebuilding what took a decade. The cost is never just diplomatic. It is operational. It is paid eventually by people in kit. You learn to speak 2 languages simultaneously, the language of operations and the language of institutions. Your operators speak the first with total fluency. The politicians who authorize your mission speak only the second. Your job is translation, and the specific loneliness of translation is that you are never fully trusted by either side. West Africa, 2024. 3 governments involved. 2 want direct action. 1 wants negotiation. 11 hostages, a 60-hour window before they are moved beyond reach. You have 90 minutes to brief the Secretary of Defense and make a recommendation that will either resolve the situation or define the next 6 months of American foreign policy in the region. You have spent 30 years becoming the person in this room. You give the brief, you make the recommendation, it is accepted, the operation runs, 11 people come home. You are in another meeting when it concludes. That is the price of this level. You are never present at the moment of completion. You are already in the next problem before the current one finishes resolving. thing. Success is not celebrated here. It is cataloged, analyzed, and built into the architecture of the next decision. Then, near the end of a night exercise debrief, something surfaces. An instructor, a cold morning, the end of OTC, a sentence that stopped halfway. The question is never whether you're brave enough. Brave enough is the floor, not the ceiling. You waited 11 years for the second half. Here it is. The ceiling is whether you're honest enough about what you know, what you don't, what this decision will cost someone who isn't in the room. You were 22 when you heard the first half. You needed to be 50 to understand why he stopped where he did. You weren't ready for the rest of it. You had to become the man in this room first. Some sentences can only be completed by the life between them. The first morning after retirement, you wake at 4:30. No alarm. The body doesn't receive the memo. It simply continues the only rhythm it has known for 34 years. You lie in the dark for a moment, waiting for the shape of the day to arrive. The mission, the brief, the board, the decision that needs to be made before anyone else is awake. Nothing comes. You get up anyway, make coffee. Sit on the porch in the dark and listen to a silence that has no operational content whatsoever. It takes longer than you expected to stop threat assessing the neighborhood. 3 weeks later, you're in a grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon. Fluorescent light, moderate foot traffic. You clock the exits before you reach the produce section. You identify the two men whose body language doesn't match their environment before you've consciously decided to look. 34 years of pattern recognition does not pause because you filed the paperwork. The hardware outlasts the assignment. You stand in the cereal aisle for a long moment, not lost, recalibrating. You consult, you teach, you speak occasionally, never about the missions, always about the cost of the standard. The men you trained are working. Some lead squadrons. One sits at a JSOC desk making decisions you recognize from the inside. They carry something forward that was handed to you by Harwick and Okafor, and men whose names will never appear in any public accounting of what kept certain things from happening in certain places at certain times. That is the nature of a life built on craft rather than recognition. The recognition was never part of the structure. The craft remains. It lives in standards that held when holding them was costly, in decisions made correctly when the easier path was available and no one was watching to know the difference. In the quiet fact that somewhere tonight, in a country most people couldn't locate without assistance, a young operator is making a good decision because someone before him refused to accept a lesser one. You sit on the porch most mornings now. 4:30, coffee cooling in your hands, the dark giving way to something gradual and unhurried. The silence used to feel like absence, like a frequency you'd lost the receiver for. It doesn't feel that way anymore. You think about what Okafor said, both halves now, the floor and the ceiling, brave enough and honest enough, the sentence it took a lifetime to complete. You spent 34 years answering it, not perfectly, not without cost, not without nights that left marks that never fully closed, but you answered it honestly, with everything you had, every time it was asked. That is not a small thing. In a world that never knew your name, that is everything.